They humiliated him, denying his loan at one of the city's most respected banks simply because of the color of his skin. Generations of his ancestors' fight for equality ignited a fire in him, sparking a fierce resolve to dismantle the very system that tried to crush him. Step by step, he rose to a position of power, determined to transform the bank that had once dismissed him and forced them to respect those they'd so easily ignored. What he did next would shock even the most hardened skeptics. But let's start from the beginning. James Hunt, a successful black entrepreneur, took a deep breath before pushing open the sleek glass doors of the bank. The atmosphere inside was polished and professional, with gleaming floors and rows of neatly dressed tellers. James felt a surge of pride as he held his folder close to his chest, containing months of hard work and projections for an eco-friendly manufacturing business that he believed could make a real impact. He'd been tirelessly preparing for this day, refining his numbers, his pitch, and his vision. For James, this bank wasn't just any financial institution. It was the most respected one in town, known for its long-standing reputation of service, respect, and stability. Securing a loan here would mean everything. But as soon as he entered, James noticed a subtle change in the air. Conversations among the staff softened, eyes glanced his way, and then quickly turned. He felt an unease creeping up, but he pushed it aside and walked up to the front desk, where he was soon ushered to a plush office. Behind the desk sat William Smith, the loan manager. William was a man in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a crisp navy suit that screamed authority and a touch of aloofness. He looked up at James, his gaze appraising, and gestured for him to sit. James began his pitch, laying out his plan with clear confidence. He spoke of sustainable manufacturing, how his business would create local jobs, and how it addressed growing consumer demand for eco-friendly products. He'd done everything right, lined up every detail meticulously to show his credibility. But as he spoke, William's polite smile began to fade, replaced by a look of detachment. Finally, when James finished, the manager leaned back and offered him a forced smile. "I appreciate your ambition, Mr. Hunt," William said, his tone laced with thinly veiled condescension. "But I'm afraid the bank isn't in a position to grant a loan for such a high-risk venture." James's stomach dropped. "High risk?" he asked, confusion spreading over his face. "I've shown the numbers. My projections are solid, and I have collateral ready to back this. I assure you, I've taken every possible measure." William cut him off, his tone now sharper. "Mr. Hunt, we have to be cautious about the type of client we choose to partner with. The bank has an image to maintain, and certain projects may not align with that." The subtext was impossible to ignore. James could see it in William's eyes, in the way he looked at him as if he didn't belong. It wasn't his business plan under scrutiny. It was James himself. He left the bank, fists clenched at his sides, feeling the humiliation and anger bubble up. As James stepped outside the bank, the cool air hit him like a splash of cold water, grounding him back in reality. 1,000 thoughts buzzed in his mind, each more frustrating than the last. Part of him wanted to just give up, to walk away from the sting of rejection and humiliation. But he couldn't shake the feeling that giving up would be a surrender, not just for himself, but for every black business owner who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or written off. His thoughts drifted to the stories his grandfather used to tell him. Stories about the civil rights marches, the sit-ins, the fight for equality. His grandfather, a strong, proud man who had faced countless slights and outright violence, had always told him, "James, they'll try to keep you down, but don't ever let them see you quit." Those words echoed now, reigniting a fire in James's chest. He wasn't going to let this stand, not for himself, not for those who came before him, and not for those who would come after. Back at his apartment, he sat at his kitchen table, pulled out his laptop, and began to dig deep. He scoured financial reports, pored over articles about the bank's ownership structure, and researched everything he could find on how to become a shareholder. After hours of intense study, he discovered his path forward. The bank was publicly traded, and anyone with the means could buy shares, could gain a say in its operations, its leadership, and its policies. It was a long shot, but he realized that if he could gather enough influence, he could push for real change from the inside. Excitement mixed with the fear of stepping into unknown territory. But James was undeterred. The idea became a mission. Over the following weeks, he discussed his vision with close friends and trusted colleagues. He shared with them not only the experience that had fueled his resolve, but also his belief that real change was possible. His passion was contagious. Friends offered their support, and some even pooled their own resources to help him purchase an initial round of shares. They saw in him a leader, someone unwilling to accept the status quo. Buoyed by their encouragement and fueled by a sense of purpose, James was more determined than ever to not just succeed, but to make the bank a place that valued all people equally. And as he pieced together his plan, he realized he wasn't just fighting for a loan anymore. He was fighting for respect, for representation, and for justice. Months passed, and James methodically acquired shares of the bank, each purchase bringing him a little closer to the influence he needed. He was careful and deliberate, watching the market, waiting for the right moments to make his move. This was no quick grab for power. It was a well-planned strategic entry, and as his stake grew, so did his voice. At the shareholders' meetings, his presence became impossible to ignore. His ideas, his questions, his observations, each was laced with quiet authority and a vision for something greater than the bank's narrow status quo. Meanwhile, within the bank's walls, tension simmered beneath the polished surfaces. William, the same manager who had denied James that loan with such cold ease, noticed the change but dismissed it. Rumors of new blood in the shareholder group and whispers of changes coming down the line rippled through the staff. But William scoffed at the notion that these changes could affect him. To him, he was untouchable, a fixture in the bank's upper echelon. He continued his work with the same dismissive attitude toward clients he deemed unfit for the bank's image, confident that he knew how to play the game better than anyone. But all of that shifted one crisp autumn day. It was a quarterly shareholders' meeting, the type of event where only the most influential voices were heard. The room was filled with the usual array of high-powered investors and executives, and William himself was there, taking notes, assuming it would be just another routine review of numbers and policy updates. But this time, when the discussion turned to the bank's vision for future growth, a hand went up. James's. He stood, his posture straight and his voice calm but unwavering. He spoke about the need for change, about the importance of accessibility and fairness in lending practices. The room grew silent as he presented data showing the potential for increased profits by expanding services to marginalized communities. He outlined a framework for anti-discrimination policies, for transparency in loan decisions, and for actively supporting small businesses led by people from all backgrounds. At first, some executives shifted uncomfortably, sensing the challenge to their traditional ways. But as James spoke, a subtle shift occurred. His words resonated with many of the shareholders, especially those who were beginning to recognize the long-term value in evolving the bank's practices. One by one, nods of agreement spread across the room. His ideas weren't just bold. They were compelling, strategic, and grounded in solid financial rationale. As William sat there, stone-faced, it dawned on him. This was the same man he had dismissed not long ago, the same entrepreneur he deemed unsuitable. Yet here James was, not as a client begging for a loan, but as an investor with real power, a man who now held the respect and backing of the shareholders. And as James concluded, the room broke into applause, an unmistakable endorsement of his vision. A year had passed since James's initial rejection at the bank's doors, and in that time, his journey had come full circle. Now, James occupied a senior position on the bank's board, a role that gave him direct influence over the bank's policies, culture, and future. His journey from hopeful entrepreneur to powerful decision-maker was one no one could ignore. For James, it was about more than status or success. It was about securing a voice in a place that had once tried to silence him. William Smith, the manager who had dismissed James so arrogantly, had been watching James's rise with growing unease. The change in power dynamics was undeniable, and William, sensing the shifting tide, began making subtle attempts to curry favor with James. He'd greet James in the hallway with forced smiles and awkward compliments, occasionally stopping by James's office with offers to collaborate or to lend his expertise. But James wasn't interested in empty gestures. One afternoon, as William extended yet another friendly invitation, James looked him directly in the eye and reminded him of that humiliating encounter a year prior. William's face flushed with shame as he quickly realized that the man he once dismissed would not forget, and would not forgive so easily. But James's vision went far beyond holding William accountable. He wasn't there to settle scores, he was there to rewrite the rules. With his influence solidified, James rolled out a series of transformative changes. He championed programs that provided fair and accessible lending options to small businesses, especially those owned by people of color and entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. He introduced transparency in loan evaluations, ensuring that every client's proposal was assessed fairly, without hidden biases or arbitrary denials. One of his most ambitious projects was an anti-discrimination policy, backed by mandatory training on unconscious bias for all employees. James knew that true change had to come from within the culture itself, and he was determined to make the bank a model of inclusivity and respect. Under his guidance, a mentorship program was established, pairing young entrepreneurs with seasoned executives who could help them navigate the financial world, a direct response to the lack of support James had felt when he'd first sought a loan. The impact was undeniable. Word spread quickly, and the bank's reputation blossomed into something remarkable. It became known not only as a prestigious financial institution, but as a place that genuinely valued equality and embraced diverse clients and ideas. New clients flocked to the bank, and existing customers took pride in being part of an institution that actively championed justice and opportunity. As for James, his name became synonymous with resilience and justice. The community celebrated him as a leader who had turned rejection into reform, transforming an experience of discrimination into a triumph of integrity. And as he looked out from his office at the bank he now helped lead, James knew he'd done more than secure a loan. He'd helped build a legacy, a bank that was no longer just an institution, but a symbol of what true equality and fairness could achieve.